Okay, here we go. Hello, my name is Linda Abraham, and I am the president of Accepted and the moderator of today's webinar. I want to welcome all of you to Interviewing with Impact, How to Make an Impression in Your Medical School Interviews, to be presented by Cydney Foote. Before we start, a few housekeeping items. Cydney may ask a question during the presentation and ask you to raise your hand in response. You can do so by clicking on the hand icon, two icons underneath the horizontal orange arrow on your control panel. Please raise your hand when you find it. Just make sure that you folks are all comfortable with this. Well, a few more, raise your hand. If you find it, you click it. It's just a little yellow hand at the bottom of your control panel. Okay, great. Most of you have it. That's wonderful. Thank you. Appreciate that. Hold on a second here. Raising hands allows you to respond to our questions, but what about your questions? We have allotted time during and at the end of Cydney's presentation for questions, and we'll answer them then. If you have a general question and we run out of time before answering it today, you can post it on Accepted's Facebook page or in our LinkedIn group. Now, we actually have two Facebook pages, so you can choose your pleasure. One is simply facebook.com/accepted, and then the other one is facebook.com/MCAStips. And finally, there's also our LinkedIn group, which is a little bit longer URL, linkedin.com/company/accepted.com. We'll be sending out these URLs after the webinar is over. Final 2 points before we actually get to the content. Number one, we use the question window for your questions, to be sure, but we can also use it for you to answer our questions, specifically Cydney's questions. So if Cydney asks an open-ended question, please post your answer in the question window. And then number two, when you leave, you will receive a brief survey. Please fill it out. We value your feedback. We use it to improve these webinars and also to determine what we're going to discuss in the future. Finally, I'm thrilled to introduce Cydney Foote, who will present Interviewing with Impact, How to Make an Impression in Your Medical School Interviews this evening. Well, actually, you don't. She'll present it this evening. You'll make the interviews the impression whenever you have the interviews. Prior to joining Accepted, Cydney worked as administrator at the University of Washington School of Medicine. She is also the author of the ebook, Write Your Way to Medical School, and 2 other admissions-related ebooks. Using her healthcare experience, storytelling skill, and eagle editing eye, Cyd has been helping Accepted's clients gain acceptance to demanding medical schools and residency programs. Typical of the feedback I receive from Cyd's clients is this comment: I don't think I would be at the same place today without your help. So out of 20 secondaries, I received 18 interviews. I went to 11, accepted to 5, waitlisted to 4. Or another: thank you so much for your help so far. I've been really successful so far in the admissions process. I have been invited to 17 interviews, accepted at 4 schools, and awarded a full scholarship at 1 of them. Now, enough from me. Let's hear from Cyd, who will now present Interviewing with Impact, How to Make an Impression in Your Medical School Interviews.
Thank you, Linda, and welcome to everybody that's here tonight. I just want to say that I really love doing interviews, and so I'm really glad you're here tonight, and I hope that I can share some of the things that I've shared with my clients before and help them to make positive impressions. For so many applicants, these interviews are the last step that you have before you get a letter that says either we want you or a rejection letter. So it's very important that you make sure that you're the applicant the medical school wants. I'd like to start off this webinar tonight with a short clip from the TV drama ER, in which doctors are asked to sit in on medical school interviews. Having sat in on interviews myself, I can tell you that this is fairly accurate. So just be warned, the sound on GoToMeeting is slightly delayed, so the video will be out of sync, but I think you'll get the message.
So, Kevin, why do you want to be a doctor?
I've given that question a great deal of thought, and I think it all boils down to one thing. I really want to help people. My dad died of lung cancer, and I was 12, and I vowed I would work for a cure.
My research in molecular biology has been very rewarding.
I expect we'll see gene therapy in our lifetime.
I'm a people person. The bottom line is, I really want to help people.
I volunteered for the pediatrics ward. I'm very empathetic.
When I saw my kitty suffering like that, I knew that I had a calling
to help people in their time of need.
And I think you have to combine humanistic skills
with a passion for making a difference.
And I really just want to help people.
I just want to help people.
I want to help people.
Help people.
Okay, so I shared that because it's stuck in my mind over the years as I've advised medical students, or prospective medical students. There's absolutely nothing wrong with anything that any of these applicants are saying, with probably the exception of the woman talking about her suffering kitty. Because wanting to help people is a very noble cause, and uniting science with humanistic values, that's what physicians are supposed to do. But if you and every other interviewee are saying it, it's just not going to stand out. So today, we're going to go over some of the basics. These might seem too basic for some of you, and some of this may be common sense, but I'm asked these questions so often that I really believe they're worth covering, at least in brief. After that, we'll talk about preparation and how you can construct a story that goes beyond wanting to help people, that shows the real you. And we'll tackle a few of the common questions, those that I've seen my applicants really struggle with. And finally, we'll talk about some practice methods. Also, for the purposes of this webinar, I will be addressing the traditional interview format, not the MMI. On October 28th, Accepted will be hosting another webinar specifically on MMIs. So be sure to put that on your calendar if you're interviewing at one of the schools that uses that method. So, to start off with, one question I'm often asked is, what do I wear? Professional attire is best for making a positive impression. And that applicant in the video wearing a leather jacket, that's a really bad idea. For men, suits and pantsuits are fine for men and women in conservative cuts, but most male applicants wear navy gray or charcoal suits, very conservative, with a tasteful dress shirt. Your shoes should be well polished, and your accessories limited to no more than a watch and a ring. Women usually choose dark blue, black, charcoal suits as well. But if you're more comfortable in a nicely cut suit of a different color, it can be something like brown or sage, not chartreuse or anything wild like that, then go for it. Some interviewers are actually relieved to see someone wearing something other than standard issue. Do keep it conservative, though. Skirts that ride up when you sit down won't make a good impression, and you want to keep your accessories to a minimum. And also, keep in mind that you'll be walking around for a lot of the day, so wear suitable shoes so you'll be able to keep up. To keep yourself calm on the day, prepare your attire beforehand. Relax yourself further by getting to your interview location early. Give yourself plenty of time to navigate public transportation or find parking. If you're not familiar with the campus, take time to stroll around beforehand, or even the night before, and try to get a feel for whether you might fit in there. There's often a lot of waiting between the interviews, so bring along a book or your Kindle that you can read while you wait. I also recommend that you bring a good old-fashioned pen and pad of paper. It's really handy to be able to jot down some notes while you're being interviewed without staring down at your phone or relying on technology that's liable to fail you at the wrong time. A client recently asked me about waiting room etiquette, which was an interesting question. Should you talk to your fellow interviewees? I think this can be fine as long as it doesn't interfere with your own preparation. I've heard that some candidates can play mind games and try to intimidate the competition, but if someone's resorting to this, then I would think they'd probably be pretty insecure about their own chances. So just keep your conversation civil, politely excuse yourself by going to the restroom or getting a text that you have to answer right away, and go and collect your own thoughts and refocus on what's important. Once you're called into the interview room, you'll be asked to walk in with confidence. Slouching gives the impression of someone that's insecure or possibly ill, and that's definitely not the impression you want to make. Once you're in the room, you'll be asked to sit down either at a table or possibly with nothing in front of you. In the video clip we just watched, several of the interviewees were leaning back in their chairs. Some even had their knees up on the desk. While you do want to be comfortable, this is a level of familiarity that you just are not at yet with the interviewers. And if you do this, you will come across as unprofessional. So let's practice this now if you can, wherever you are. Sit up straight, but not stiffly, with your feet planted on the ground. Take a second just to roll your shoulders to make sure that you're relaxed. Be aware of what your arms are doing. Are they crossed? Are your hands in your pockets? These are the kind of nonverbal signs that can signal discomfort or nervousness. Fold your hands lightly in your lap, ready to gesture. I also find that breathing exercises can be very helpful, especially if you're feeling a lot of stress. A deep breath and a calming exhale can help you get settled before you begin. Good breathing will also help you control the tone of your voice and speak with more confidence. How do you feel now? Are you ready to start the interview with an engaged, animated tone? Next to nonverbal cues, your tone is what says the most about your interest and enthusiasm. Many people tend to flatten their voices into a monotone when they get nervous. In mock interviews, it seems that the more comfortable they get with the topic, the more passion they have in their voice. This really emphasizes the importance of practicing your stories until you know them inside and out and can share them with real excitement. Other people tend to get nervous and their voices can rise or shake or falter. The best way to deal with this is by slowing down and gaining control of your breathing. Maybe try focusing on a single person in the audience, someone who you can share your story with, as you intentionally slow down your speech and inhale. The pitch of your voice should lower as you continue. After the interview, you probably want to just take off your suit and uncomfortable shoes and relax. But just take a moment, and while this experience is fresh in your mind, record as much as you can remember. If there were any questions that stumped you, be sure to star those. I remember one client who was so sure that she'd loved an answer that in her thank you note, she explained that she'd been reflecting on this question after the interview and that she wished she'd said this instead. She was subsequently accepted at that school. Even if you don't take such a bold step, knowing which answers you need to work on will help you as you prepare for the next interviewer. I did mention thank you letters, and these are a must for everyone you meet on the interview day, even administrators. Anyone who's helped you out, send them a brief note. You don't want them to be long, just a few lines, preferably referencing something that you discussed with that person, but this will go a long way towards jogging their memory favorably. I personally still love getting thank you notes in the mail, but these days the school's online application portal or an email is probably better. So these are some of the physical things that can help you prepare and perform well on the day. Now, let's move on to preparing content, the story of you that will leave a lasting impression. You could start out by writing out perfectly phrased answers to common interview questions, and then you could spend the next couple of weeks reading them over and over until you can recite them. But if you don't have acting experience, actually, does anybody in the audience have acting experience? If you do, just raise your hand.
Yeah.
If you do have this experience, if you're an accomplished actor and you can memorize these complex scripts, then this approach might work for you.
About 10%, yeah, about 10%.
Okay.
6 to 10% have acting
Great.
experience.
For everybody else, I'd really like to share a different approach that will still help you feel natural and engaged, because this is what you need to convey. You have to be comfortable with your stories so that you can share your qualifications and make them sound natural and unrehearsed. I can't give you answers to the questions that you'll be asked, but I can give you a method for answering them, which should help you answer both the questions you expect and those you never saw coming. So to do that, I'd like us to start by addressing a couple of key questions. First of all, your goals. How do you want the interviewer to think of you? Second, how can you reinforce your strengths and address your key weaknesses? Third, how can you show that you know a great deal about the school, that you are well prepared for the interview? And how will this show you what you need to know to decide which school you'll attend? In answering these questions, you will set goals for the interview and give yourself a clearer idea of what impression you want to leave with the interviewer beyond this desire to help people. So let's break these down a little bit. And I'd like you to take just a moment now and write down how you want the interviewer to think of you. What specific impressions and information do you want them to carry away from the interview? You could either write this to yourself, or you could write it in your text box for Linda to read. And I'm not asking for things like, I want them to know I'm really committed to medicine, or vague ideas like, I've had valuable experiences that will make me a good doctor. Try to be specific about what exactly you want the interviewer to remember. Compassionate, adventurous, tenacious, determined, whatever it is.
All right. Somebody wrote, Sid, Midwest grounded entrepreneur with a humanistic compassion for the well-being of all people.
Okay. That's pretty good.
That's a mouthful.
If it can be, yeah, if you can back it up, that's great.
Malika Watt wrote, I apologize for mispronouncing names, confident. Anybody else want to write something that we can share?
Okay, let's go on.
Okay. Genuine and thorough.
Wrote down,
Emily just shared, genuine and thorough.
Okay. Did anybody write down hard worker?
Raise your hand if you did, please. Nope. Up one.
Nobody, really?
No. We are getting some now. 2. 6%. 2 people. 3 people. All right. Yay. Okay.
The reason I point out hard worker is because that's the answer I hear most often when I'm doing mock interviews. And applicants either point to their GPA and MCAT scores as evidence that they work hard, or they'll point to the hard work that they do in lieu of their GPA or the MCAT scores. I don't doubt that it's true. I think that everybody applying to medical school is probably a very hard worker, but that's not a quality that's really going to make you stand out. So what is it that makes you special? What are you going to say when they ask that gem of a question? If there were 50 applicants in the room, why would we pick you? This is what your personal statement and your secondaries have already begun to answer. And this is where your interview will build on that and expand. If you've done a good job on those, and you did if you're being invited to interview, then you'll be able to pull out elements and expand on them. Go through your previous written materials very carefully. Pull out 5 or 6 main qualities that you want to present to the admissions officer. In your answers, you'll keep coming back to these main ideas, reiterating them, reaffirming them, and instilling them in the mind of the interviewer. Once you know what you want to emphasize, how can you make sure these ideas come through? Well, what I'd like to do now is to take these qualities, your leadership, your integrity, your interest in people, your entrepreneurship, and yes, your work ethic and your confidence, and think of 1 or 2 stories for each quality that you've listed. If these truly are your qualities, this exercise won't be difficult. You should have several instances where you've demonstrated these characteristics. Some of your stories will illustrate multiple qualities, which is even better. To put it another way, I'm really asking you to think about your own qualities and characteristics rather than the answers to specific questions. It's a shift in thinking that will give you a lot more flexibility during your interview. For instance, a typical applicant describes his research like this. I've been involved with the Johnson Lab for the past 3 years. My main role is inputting and interpreting data. I'm involved in weekly group discussions and have authored a review to determine efficacy. I'm also working on another review now, and I'm interested in collecting data from articles. From these few lines, the applicant can pull out elements of curiosity, critical thinking, and collaboration, some of the ideas that he wants to instill in his interviewer's mind. But don't make the interviewer pull these out for you. Bring them to the forefront. I've been involved with the Johnson Lab for the past 3 years. What's really interesting about my work is that while inputting and interpreting data, my critical thinking skills have gotten much stronger. Now I'm understanding subtleties in the data and detecting patterns I want to explain. Our lab is very collaborative, and I always look forward to contributing at our weekly group discussions and hearing about our project. This description can't help but sound more engaging. The applicant is telling what's interesting about it. He's pulling out elements he enjoys and that he's good at. But remember how I said not to write out the perfectly phrased answer? If you can just remember a few key points you want to make, then you can much more easily revise them on the fly. So, for instance, this applicant might have bullet points that say he wants to show he's in the Johnson Lab for 3 years, that interpreting and inputting the data shows his critical thinking skills, and his contributions and the way he's learned from others exemplify the collaborative environment that he is trying to promote. But what if there's no question about research? What if the same applicant is asked to describe how he's worked with teammates? In that case, he just shifts these bullet points around, and the story is just modified. I've been involved with the Johnson Lab for the past 3 years. Our lab is very collaborative. At our weekly group discussions, everybody has a chance to share their projects and help each other with problems. Inputting and interpreting data can be solitary work, but when I'm sharing what I want to explain, input from the other lab members really helps me gain critical thinking skills. So what I'm trying to show you is if you can get comfortable with your stories, if you can distill your examples down to a couple of key bullet points, and you know the elements that they do illustrate, then you'll be able to address the unexpected questions that arise with no trouble. Does anybody have any questions about this before we go on?
If you have questions, please post them in the question window. We're using it for what it's intended at the moment. Any questions on what Sid has presented to this point? And we will also have questions at the end.
Yeah.
The webinar, there is one question here about if this webinar will be recorded. Yes, it is being recorded, and the recording should be posted sometime next week. It'll be posted on the same page where you registered, and you will all get an email when it is posted and available for you to review. Okay? You're welcome.
Okay. I'll go on, and the next time I stop for questions, if there's been any, I can address them then.
Okay.
Okay, so let's go on to strengths and weaknesses. Medical schools are very fond of asking applicants to identify these. Again, identifying these qualities in your stories will really help. Say you've prepared stories about your research, your community service, and your work on a foreign mission. You can talk about these in any variety of ways, showing lots of your characteristics. So far in your interview, the interviewer has only asked about your research and community service work. So you can use this opportunity to bring up your work in the mission, which, as you've already decided, illustrates your resourcefulness, your communication skills, and your teamwork abilities. Choose one of these skills, pop in an example from the mission, and away you go. Your greatest weakness is a bit trickier, but again, it's about framing your answer. Nobody is perfect, and the med schools really want to know that you know yourself well enough to be able to identify your weaknesses. They also want to know that, one, they aren't debilitating or limiting your study of medicine, and two, that you're working to improve them. There's no point in saying you're a perfectionist. This answer does not work. But you might be overly detail-oriented, which isn't necessarily a bad thing in some medical fields. Or you might have a tendency to bite off more than you can chew and feel like you're letting people down. This is a common problem for med school applicants. Or at the other extreme, you might be shy or have trouble taking risks. Any of these weaknesses might be severely debilitating, or they might be no big deal. I think it can be human nature to imagine the worst, though, so rein in the interviewer's imaginations with examples. Explain how your shyness kept you from joining clubs when you were in high school, or share a time when you had trouble balancing all your responsibilities. This will set boundaries for your weakness, hopefully ones that you can overcome. Showing what you've done to then overcome your weaknesses will help you, whether you've explored better time management or joined a local Toastmasters club. Show the interviewer that you don't just know about your weaknesses, but that you're taking steps to overcome it. But what about the weak spots on your application? Do you have a failed class or a failed year? A big gap that you need to explain? Again, you should know about these ahead of time, and being able to explain them and frame them is the best way to deal with them. It might sound cliched, but honesty really is the best policy here. Show that you accept responsibility for whatever happened, that you've learned from the experience, and that you won't make the same mistake again. As well as knowing your stories, you need to be able to show that you know a great deal about the school. You can subtly introduce this information in your answers. A few good ways to do this are by linking your research interest to one of their programs, or describing your interest in global medicine by mentioning their global health exchange. For example, if asked about your research with targeted insulin receptors at Mount Sinai, you might start your answer with something like, "I'm glad you asked me about that, because the East Harlem Health Outreach Partnership on Diabetes is one of the reasons I want to attend Mount Sinai." Then explain your research and close with, "I've learned a lot about diabetes in the lab, and now I want to see how it's treated in the community." So this really ties it together and shows that you're a perfect fit for the program. But where do you get these details? Your first stop should be the program's website. You probably already visited that if you had to explain why you were drawn to the school in your secondaries. But I think the absolute most useful place to visit for an interview is the news section of the website. Is there a new obstetrics wing that they're especially proud of? Did a research program just get funding? Have they created a new scholarship for research fellows? These are the kinds of things that admissions people really like to talk about. They're proud of these things. And they're the kinds of things that you should know about before you set foot on campus. How can you learn about whatever you need to know so you can decide which school to attend? It's sometimes said that interviews are the chance for interviewees to interview the interviewers. That's a mouthful. This is never so true as in med school interviews. This is where you'll determine whether you think the school is a fit for you just as much as they're trying to see if you work for them. Go in prepared to find out the answers to your question. You obviously don't want to do this in an aggressive manner, but explaining why something is important to you, for instance, dedicated research time, and then asking what can realistically be expected, shows that you've reflected on your goals and you are assertive in achieving them. Also, if you're speaking to different groups, you can have differently targeted questions. For instance, if you're interviewing with students, you can ask logistical questions, or you can ask them about favorite classes and professors and these kinds of things, and that way you'll get a lot of more candid information. The idea for all of this is to make sure that you know what you want out of the school and that you know the stories that you've experienced, that you're not reading these and that you haven't memorized them. Focus on learning them so you can adapt them and are comfortable telling them in different ways. Before we move on to practice methods, let's talk about how to handle that most dreaded question of all. Tell me about yourself. This is often one of the first questions you'll encounter in an interview, and it's where so many of my clients struggle, because this is where you want to establish your first impression. I think that there's a natural tendency to tackle this question in chronological order, but don't. Strike the words "I was born in" from your vocabulary. Instead, look for a common theme that pulls together varied elements of your experiences. What I really like to do with my clients is to have them take on this question by just introducing any ideas they might want to include. The most common elements are their family background, their cultural upbringing, their interest in science and research, their community or clinical activities. Sometimes they'll add in personal hobbies, although this is usually an afterthought. After this, for lack of a better word, brain dump, we repackage it. We tease through the different threads and find what they have in common. The screen that you're looking at now is a client I recently worked with. As we were talking, she told me about her mother's experience in China, and that and we were able to pull out a love of learning that she had inherited when her mother immigrated from China. So she did her tell me about yourself question framed as a life dedicated to teaching and learning in the terms of her mother's determination to find a better world. And the answer came out perfectly. Or you might want to highlight qualities like discipline and teamwork, like this applicant with a strong history of communication did. But that's the next slide.
Yeah.
Growing up in Texas, I thought I would be a professional baseball player. But when I turned 17, I realized I enjoyed the time I spent volunteering at the nursing home more than I did being on the field. Then he was able to bring his experiences into context, but still have a flavor of his outside hobbies and what he enjoyed doing. An older non-traditional applicant might ramble through the twists and turns of his career, which runs the risk of boring listeners. Or you might start out with a startling statement like, "My high school biology teacher said I'd never amount to anything. While I was working and painting houses in the hot Florida sun, I thought he was right. But today I'm working for a vaccine company. How I got here is an interesting story." With all of these introductions, you're really pulling the listeners in. It's very much like writing your essays that you've already done for your secondaries and your primary essay, but these need to be short, usually about, I'd say, 3 minutes long. And if you have a theme that unites them, you're going to make more of an impression in that 3 minutes than if you just give them the chronological list of what you've done. These 3 examples are all real answers, with the details changed, of course, that my clients and I develop based on what might initially have seemed like a mass of unconnected ideas. The key, in my mind, is to get these ideas out before you try to make sense of them. Writing them down, or better, recording them, can help you get that brain dump that you need. And if you have a friend who can sort through them with you, that's much better, since it can be very hard to be objective about your own experiences. I'm sometimes asked if this question needs to explain why you are motivated to be a doctor. While I think that the stories you share should naturally lead into that question, this really is a different question. And while you will probably have aspects of your interest in medicine in here, your interest in research or your clinical work, you'll need more if you truly want to tell them about who you are. Okay, I was going to pause for some more questions here. Linda, did anything come through?
Are there any, you know what I'd like to do, there is a kind of a general question. I'd like to save that for the end. But if there are any questions specifically related to what Sid has been discussing, you're certainly welcome to post it in the question window, and we can take it now. Does anybody have any questions on the material that Sid has been discussing, specifically how do you prepare? All right, Jeremy asks, what are some other common themes?
The person who was talking about being an entrepreneur with a humanistic value, that's a theme.
I think it's the same. I think it's the same person. Yes.
Oh, okay. Yeah, entrepreneurialism is a great theme. You know, if you could talk about, you know, from my early days, I always wanted to innovate and find new ways to do things. This led me to research, or it led me to become the lead in the volunteer team to manage new trainees, or whatever it might be. So that's a very powerful theme you can use. You can put it in terms of your, like I said, your past careers, or your work as an EMT, or something that you learned on a mission or a study abroad program. The themes are really, they're endless. But they really need to be drawn out of what you'll see as the common elements from what you present as who you are.
Right. Now, Niranjana, and I apologize to anybody whose name I'm mispronouncing, asks, why is it better to not go through your life events chronologically? Why is it better to choose a theme, to try and approach it as you're approaching it here?
Because when you're giving people just fact after fact after fact, and the next person is giving them fact after fact after fact, and the next person is giving them fact after fact after fact, it blurs.
Right.
I know when we were sitting on admissions committees, the answers, there were so many people that had very similar backgrounds in research and clinical activities, and at some point you just don't differentiate. But if you can say, oh, but then there was that guy who's an entrepreneur, or, oh, there was that girl whose mom was in the revolution. She sounded interesting. Those kind of themes stand out.
Right. Absolutely. And I think that since part of the purpose here is to distinguish yourself, I mean, everybody was born somewhere and grew up and has a family. But if you start immediately, if you will, with what you really want them to remember and what you're going to try and show them in the course of your answers and throughout the interview, then you're also helping to distinguish yourself from your competition. And as Sid pointed out, making yourself more memorable.
Exactly.
Okay. Let's go on. Okay.
Okay. All right. So now for the final element, practicing. Remember that you want your interview to feel conversational, engaging, and unrehearsed. That's a pretty tall order when you're feeling nervous, and you may be even feeling a little desperate. Practice is the only thing that will help you feel comfortable and even natural telling your stories. There are many ways that you can practice, both by yourself and with others. Talk to yourself. This is by far the most useful way I can tell you to practice your stories. I encourage my clients to talk to themselves when they're driving in a car, when they're in the shower, when they're washing dishes, any time that they're alone. I really like this method because I think it helps you get very comfortable talking about yourself without having to set aside a designated formal practice time. Another thing you can do is to debate yourself. Often in interviews, you'll be asked ethical or philosophical questions. There really are no right or wrong answers here. The interviewers just want to know that you're informed and that you're able to think. Reading current issues of JAMA is a great way to prepare, but it's one thing to read the articles and another thing to present them coherently. That's where this method comes in. Try to argue both sides of a popular debate, stem cell research, for instance, or marijuana legalization. Presenting these different viewpoints will ensure that you really understand them and that you could make an argument for or against an issue. Recording yourself is the third way you can practice. I don't recommend that you do this every time. There's just too much setup involved, and you'll get away from that informal storytelling that you want to have when you talk to yourself, that you'll have when you talk to yourself. But it is a good idea to hear how you sound. If you speak in a monotone, for instance, or if you overuse filler words like or actually. If you do this at the early stages of your practice, you'll be able to identify a lot of ways to improve. The fourth thing I recommend is to practice in front of a mirror, or if you have the equipment, you can videotape yourself. But what you want to do is sit in front of a full-length mirror or have the camera on your entire body so that you can see if you're leaning forward to answer questions, if you're sitting up straight, or if you're drawing back defensively or have some annoying thing you do with your hands. Fifth thing you can do is to practice with other people. Give your parents or roommates or best friends a list of questions and just have them fire them at you. I'd encourage you not to do this until you've gotten more comfortable with your stories. This is for the later stages of the interview practice, but if you do this, you'll be able to get some good feedback if you ask them to be honest. And you can always schedule a mock interview with a consultant. We're paid to give you honest feedback. And this can be a useful tool to help you identify and address any difficult questions or problem areas. You can start practicing anytime you want. In fact, the earlier the better. The more aware you are of your personal quirks, the more likely you'll have time to address them. And the more accustomed you are to sharing your stories, the more comfortable you'll be in the interview. So that's it. I hope this introduction to interviewing was helpful, and I hope you can use these techniques to make an impact. If you have any questions, please stick around and let me know. We'll be here to take some more questions, and good luck to you all.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Cyd. For the audience here, please post questions that you have on any part of the presentation. And I mentioned earlier that there was a question that was posted earlier, and Cyd, I'd like to raise it now so that you can respond.
Okay.
And the question is, if you cannot think of any specific answers on the spot, how much do you look down upon making up an answer?
I would make up an answer. I'd like I said, a person's mind automatically goes to the worst possible thing here. So
yeah.
If it was a little thing, I don't know. I would encourage honesty. If there's anything you can be checked on, then you do not want to lie to them because they have a lot of ways of finding things out.
Right. And you're very welcome, Emily. I would look down on it a lot, but I don't even think that my personal opinion or Cydney's personal opinion is the issue here. It can be caught, number one. And number two, realize that if you are making something up, it probably will show. It's usually very obvious when somebody isn't confident in their answer. So I would just say, let me think about that a minute. And think about the notes that you've prepared per Cydney's directions and the qualities that you want to bring out, and then answer to the best of your ability. But answer honestly. Don't make it up.
And I think that's the key thing is I think if you prepare well, then there's never going to be an answer that you don't know because you're talking about yourself and you do know your own stories. Now, they may ask you a question about, a technology that you're not aware of, or, it could be, there's a lot of different scientific questions they may ask you. In those cases, it's very easy to say, I'm just not aware of that. I'm sorry, it's not something that I've researched or that I've worked in. It sounds really interesting. Would you like, could you tell me more about it, or I'll look it up when I get home, or anything like that. I think that's a better answer than trying to make up something that's factual, which you definitely would look like a fool if you if you mess it up.
Right, right. Couldn't agree more. All right, we have some great questions coming in. From
Okay.
Tenten, are there going to be more than one person interviewing? And we're not talking about the MMI today. If it's, let's say, 3, then who do I maintain eye contact with? Eye contact is something I struggle with.
That's a really good question.
Isn't it?
Sometimes you'll have several people interviewing you, and sometimes it will be one-on-one. If it is several people, you can pick one. Often the one in the middle is good. You can pick, if you can, move from one to the other. But if you find a sympathetic face out there that, is giving you some encouraging feedback, feel free to use it, if that's what makes you confident. The others will still get the message as long as you sound confident. But ideally, do try to look at everyone, and if during your answers you're not speaking with them, you can, definitely look at them at other times. So, as you're waiting for questions or whatever. One other thing that you might want to do as you're practicing is to have several people listen to your answers as you give them. I find that just practicing and looking, or practicing anything that you're planning to do is going to help you out that day.
Great. Thank you. William asks, with a positive frame of mind, what is the worst mistake you can make in an interview?
The worst mistake.
Putting your feet up on the desk? Yeah.
Being late, anything that makes you look unprofessional is very bad. Anything that, being late, looking like you just, got out of bed, those kind of things just make you look like you don't really care. The other thing that I would really avoid doing, and you should know this already from just doing your essays, is don't speak critically of other doctors or other medical professionals. And that's just a courtesy thing. As this stage in your education, you will be seen as being very cocky if you criticize how, in your answers, if you're criticizing how other medical professionals have handled something.
Okay. And here we have a question from Jonathan. When they ask you if you have any questions for them, how should we calibrate how many questions? How long to talk with them then? I don't want to cut the interview off prematurely, but I also don't want to overstay my proverbial welcome.
Right. One thing is they're very skilled at getting people in and out of the rooms within the time that's allotted. So the onus is on them to keep to their schedule. If you're having a very engaged conversation and it seems like it's taking longer, you can always say, I'm really interested in this. I don't want to keep you, longer, but, would it be okay if, I emailed you about this? Having that kind of contact can be very valuable to you later. So that's one way you can deal with it. The number of questions that you have for them, I would have a lot prepared without assuming that you're going to get through them all. And have them prepared for different people. So have some prepared for the professors that are interviewing you and have some prepared for the students that are interviewing you. Yeah, and it really is a conversation. A lot of these, especially with this traditional style interview, they are very relaxed and conversational, and you will have a good feel for whether or not to continue the conversation or not.
Okay, great. Alyssa asks, what is the best way to answer the question, what is your biggest failure?
Well, I'd be surprised if you haven't answered that question already in your secondary essays, because so many schools do ask things like that, or your biggest challenge. What I would tackle it the same way as you tackle your greatest weakness question. You're picking an example of something that you didn't do well. Frame it in a very concrete way so they understand exactly what the failure was. Take responsibility for it and show what you learned from it. And if you could do that, and if possible, show ways that you've improved since then, that would be a great failure essay, or great failure answer.
Yeah, that's right. The other thing, if you have time, I would suggest that if you can also talk about a time where you had a similar situation and you handled it well, that would be kind of the cherry on top of your response. All right, Camille asks, I honestly can't remember the last time I've had a significant conflict with somebody. So how should I respond to that question?
You have a very nice life.
Keep it up.
Yeah. Conflict can be anything. It can be, something from your brother, not respecting your stuff, to your,
Roommate.
your bank overcharging you, or, there's conflicts in so many different aspects of your life, and you may be trying to see it as too significant a conflict and trying to find something big enough that, matters. What I think you should really remember is that it's less the scale of the conflict and more how you react to it that they're judging, that they're evaluating. It's your perspective. So, it could be something as minor as, having, I don't know, somebody charge you extra for something that you didn't buy or something like that. But the way that you, address it respectfully, or the way that you, deal with it is, that's a good indicator of your personality and your character. But there's got to be some conflict somewhere. I would just try to maybe lower your expectations of what it's supposed to be and see if you can come up with something a little more realistic.
Okay. Yeah, Camille really appreciated that one. And then another question from Amar. How comfortable should one get with the interviewer? I know myself well enough to know that I am an amiable person, and I also like to laugh a lot. Would that be looked down upon?
Absolutely not. That's great. And that is one way that you'll be remembered. Not if you're going, laughing at everything. And some people have a nervous laugh, so that's something that you do need to watch. But if you're just someone that's generally enjoying the conversation, chances are they're going to enjoy it too. And those kind of interviews are fantastic to have. So yeah, keep that up. Definitely.
Okay. Alicia asks, how do you go about explaining discrepancies in your application? For example, a poor semester, a low MCAT, etc.
Like I said, you really just need to be honest with those. A lot of times there's no real excuse. You overcommitted yourself is, generally what happens. With the MCAT, it may be that you were very stressed about it, that you don't test well. Just explain that. The thing is, if you've reached the interview stage, your MCAT and your GPA are probably less of a consideration to them, or less of a concern to them. If you've reached this stage, they're interested in you despite what those problem areas are. So just own up to it. Take responsibility for it, and hopefully show ways that, since that semester when I, failed 2 classes, I retook the classes and got A's, or I, was, whatever it is, to try to improve it and to try to show that you've improved.
Right. I also want to mention, and I just posted it actually in the chat window, I can post it here too, that we actually have a page, a gateway page. You're welcome, Alicia. Alicia's, thank you, is it Camille? With articles and resources for people who do have a low MCAT, a low GPA, or whatever. And I think in August we had a webinar specifically on that topic. So if you go to the page I just posted, and again I'll post it here too, you can explore those resources. You have shorter articles, you have a more comprehensive webinar, but that will also help you. Okay, and again
can I add one thing?
Sure.
For just with a low MCAT score, I think that there's so many people that do poorly on that kind of standardized test. I know I'm one of those people. And I think that most doctors understand this. Most faculty understand this. So if you can show that in other areas that it's not an issue with learning the material or retaining the material, it's just that sort of timed test that you struggle with. That can be a great thing to do. Just outweigh, show that your GPA, that your grades, that other things that you've done mitigate the experience on the MCAT.
Okay, great. I also borrow something that this actually came from an MBA chat we hosted for UCLA, but I think the lesson is very applicable here. We had a chat, and the dean for the MBA program was on the chat, and people were very focused on how do I handle a low test score, how do I handle a bad GPA or a bad year, or what if I had a gap in my employment, which for MBAs is really important. And the dean just said to them, look, we're not looking just for reasons to reject you. We really want to find reasons to accept you. Show us that you can shine. Show us that you excel in something. And I think that really gets back to Cyd's whole point of choosing the characteristics that you want to reveal in the interview and the examples, the presumably achievements that reveal those, that exemplify those characteristics, that display those attributes. And if you can do that, then you're definitely distinguishing yourself and you're giving them reasons to accept you and not just refraining or trying to justify a reason to reject you. And that I thought was a great point he made. We're looking for, where have you excelled? We're looking for reasons to accept you.
That's excellent advice.
Okay. And then Tenson asks, how will you know if anybody has any additional questions? We still have a couple of minutes left. If you do have additional questions, please post them. Tenson asks, how will you know it's time to leave the interview without seeming awkward and unsure?
This is very much a cue for them. They will be the ones keeping an eye on the clock. Don't worry about that. That's not your job.
Okay. Any last questions? I want to really thank Cyd for presenting this webinar. I think you've learned how to make a great impression, and you're getting lots of thank yous here from Alicia, from Jonathan, Tenson, and I think you just laid it out so well. Taylor, Jeremy, Niranjana, we're all very appreciative. So thank you very much, Alyssa. If the audience, if you have additional questions, again, you can post it on the Facebook page, facebook.com/accepted or facebook.com/MCAStips. Thank you so much for coming. Cydney, thank you very much. And everybody have a very good evening. Oh, and remember to fill out the questionnaire. Thank you again. Bye-bye.
Good luck, everybody.
Good luck.